Thank you very much for the welcome speeches. Now let's move on to our keynote speakers. First of all, let me introduce Professor András Kovács, who is a sociologist, Professor Emeritus at the Nationalism Studies program, and also an academic director of Jewish Studies at the Central European University in Vienna, Austria. He will be followed by Rabbi Baruch Oberlander, who is the chief leader of the Chabad Lubavitch, Hungary, and also the head of the Budapest Orthodox Rabbinate. Unfortunately, because of unforeseen personal reasons, we cannot have Rabbi Robert Fröhlich with us today. So please, Professor András Kovács, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the invitation, ladies and gentlemen. And I have a quite difficult task here received for the organizers. And the task is to give an overview on Hungarian Jewish history in 20 minutes. I think that you can imagine that it is quite a challenge. But when I started to think it over, what could I speak about, it immediately occurred to me a key concept which should be used if someone wants to give a general overview of the Jews of history, of the history of the Jews in Hungary. This key concept was coined by an Hungarian-born Israeli historian, Jacob Katz, who was, by the way, in the 20s, a pupil of the Papa Yeshiva. And the key concept was published in a short essay of Katz under the title, The Uniqueness of Hungarian Jewry, the uniqueness of the history of Hungarian Jewry. What does this uniqueness mean? This uniqueness, according to Katz, means, first of all, the extremely quick integration into the Hungarian society after the second half of the 19th century, with the support of the political class of the time. This integration was not assimilation in the sense of the total absorption, but something different. It was basically a gradual diminishing of social distance between the majority of the society and between the minority, the Jews. Social historians produce several important indicators of this process. For example, I will only quote here one, the learning of the language of the majority. As you know, in Hungary, in every 10th year, there was a total census of the population, and the numbers about mother tongue in the census of 1910 showed that 70% of the Jews living on the territory of Hungary, at that time there was about 900,000 Jews living in the territory of the Hungarian kingdom inside of the Austro-Hungarian monarchy. So 70% of the Jews declared Hungarian being their mother tongue. The same number for Roman Catholics was at that time 50%. And there are some other very impressive indicators which show how quickly, we are speaking about only 60 years, 56 years, how quickly the Hungarian Jews integrated into the Hungarian society, especially in modern urban context and in different fields of ongoing modernization of the Hungarian society, in which the Hungarian Jews played a very important role. This was exactly this role why the liberal Hungarian political class supported the emancipation of the Jews, and later on supported the establishment of different Jewish institutions in the time of the dual monarchy. As a consequence of this process, Hungarian Jews developed a certain type of dual identification. They identified themselves nationally as Hungarian and religiously as Jewish. And this was the uniqueness in the Hungarian Jewish history, which was unparalleled in the contemporary Europe. But the trends have been changed after the First World War. And exactly this uniqueness made the destruction of the Hungarian Jews also unique. The destruction of Hungarian Jews in 1944 was unprecedented in the history of the Shoah, first of all, because of its speed, because of its depth, and because of the collaboration of the Hungarian government, and because of the indifference of the surrounding society. This is why the renowned historian of the Hungarian Shoah, Randolph Braham, wrote in his basic work on the history of the Hungarian Shoah that the distinctly Hungarian aspect of the history of the Hungarian Jewry, what Katz wrote about, proved to be a fatal mistake which was corrected in the end by the tragic conclusion. Therefore, this dual uniqueness, first of all, the uniqueness of the integration, and on the other hand, the uniqueness of the Shoah in Hungary, this dual uniqueness are the factors which determine and form the profile of the Hungarian Jews in contemporary Hungary. What does it mean? The first factor of this change, or of this, the first impact of this dual uniqueness on Hungarian history is that after the war, after the Shoah, despite the experience of being excluded from the national community earlier they felt to belong to, the secularization and the enhanced integration of the Hungarian Jews in the society continued. How to explain this? The first factor which explained the continuation of the the integration and assimilation of Hungarian Jews into the surrounding society. The first explaining factor of it is that the Holocaust, the Shoah, changed basically the structure of the Hungarian Jewry. The more traditional, religiously orthodox strata disappeared, since nearly the totality of the Jews at the countryside were executed, were deported, and then killed in the concentration camp. That meant, because of the Jews of Budapest had actually a much bigger chance for surviving the persecution, this meant that the proportion, that the weight of the secular, already integrated, assimilated urban Jewry became much stronger after the Shoah than it was before. This factor was enhanced by the emigration of the remnant of the Orthodoxy between 1945 and basically 1965. All small but still existing groups of the Hungarian Orthodoxy left the country and migrated to Israel or to the United States. Another important factor of the ongoing assimilation process was the change which was reinforced by further reinforced by communist policies. As you know, the communist political system put a strong pressure on religious institutions and on religious practice. They forced religious leaderships to collaborate with the regime. This collaboration was made under duress, and additionally, the hostility towards all types of national identities, especially against Zionism, which was the official communist policy in the early 50s, and it was a basic trait of Soviet policy against the Jews. All these factors pushed the remnant of the surviving Jews towards more assimilation and towards more secular positions. The result of this policy was that the surviving remnant and the children of them, this is the so-called second generation, had only weak ties, on one hand to Jewish institutions, and on the other hand to Jewish religious and cultural tradition. Their self-identification was basically based on external stigmatization. They defined themselves, they felt themselves as Jewish only if they met anti-Semitism in the society. The behavioral answer to this position was hiding and passing, which meant that a large majority of the younger Jews, especially members of the second generation born after the Shoah, tried to hide their Jewish background in all public spheres. And this led to a strange type of unpleasant psychological status. It led to stigmatized behavior in many forms in which Jewishness could appear as a factor in or as a part of the interaction with the surrounding society. So this was a situation in the period of the collapse of the old system. The question is how this picture has changed after the fall of the old system. What makes the Jews in Hungary after 1990 Jewish? I have carried out two large-scale sociological attitudes on this issue. The first one was made in 1997, and the second one 20 years later in 2017. What do these surveys tell us about the state of the affairs among the Hungarian Jews? First of all, this is always the first question, how many Jews are actually living in Hungary now? And the usual answer is that it's very difficult to know because being Jewish is defined differently by several criteria. If you look at the religious definition of Jewishness, the halakhic definition of it, then there are about 60,000 Jews living in contemporary Hungary. If you look at another more sociological definition of belonging to the group, means one Jewish parent, then there are about 100,000, 130,000 Jews living in the country. But if you take the Israeli law of return definition of the population, means one Jewish grandparent, then the number would be around 160,000, 180,000. How far are these Jews Jewish? There are several indicators which can be used for answering this question. The one indicator is the number of those who already publicly declare their Jewishness. The indicators of public self-identifications are in Hungary too. There are two of them. The first one is defining the person, self-definition of the person in the time of the census. And the second one is the number of those who are ready, who donate their 1% taxes to one of the Jewish denominations. Both indicators show that there are about between 10 and 13,000 people in Hungary who are self-identifying themselves as Jewish in the time of the census, and more or less the same number donates the taxes to one of the Jewish organizations. If we use a more strict definition, for example, if you want to estimate the number of those who are involved in religious activities, who follow, who are participating in religious practices, then the number is much lower. According to our research, this was made by using participant observation. At the high Jewish holidays, there are about 4,000 people who attend services in the synagogues of the country. But if we look at a normal Shabbat ceremony, then the number is much lower. It's about 1,000. So it shows that there is a relatively large Jewish population in the country, but only a minority of them are ready to self-identify themselves as Jewish publicly, and even a smaller minority is participating in religious activities. But these are only numbers. And if you look at the Jewish population of Hungary from a more sociological point of view, then you can see that being Jewish in Hungary, so the layers who can be defined as Jewish in Hungary are much wider than this. What are these other indicators? The first of all, there are indicators of a certain religious cultural revival among younger Hungarian Jews, especially after 1990. This was a time when not only in the Jewish context, but in other contexts, there was a religious revival and there was an ethnic revival as well. So certain religious and cultural practices appear much more frequently in Jewish families nowadays than it was the case in the communist time. And so this is one sign of a certain revival. Nevertheless, religiosity and following religious cultural traditions is not in the main ground for identification for the majority of the Jews in Hungary. According to our results, according to our survey results, historical memory is the most important component of identity for Jews in present-day Hungary. Historical memory, which means the memory of the ancestors and the memory of the Shoah. And this is a very important factor because this is still the core of self-identification, present in nearly all families, and this explains why present-day Jews feel distance to the present-day Hungarian political course. They think that despite the support the government offers to religious institutions and politically to the state of Israel, their core self-identity is challenged by the policy of the dominant policy in the country. First sign of the first embodiment of this challenge was the erection of the memorial of German occupation in the center of the city, which can be considered as relativization of the responsibility of the Hungarian regime of the time for the Holocaust. The second challenge of this for this self-identification based on cultural and on memory is that from time to time openly anti-Semitic personalities receive influential positions in cultural life. And the third factor of this was the campaign in which traditional visual anti-Semitic stereotypes were used in the campaign, for example, against the American-Hungarian philanthropist George Soros. All these factors suggest for the Jews for whom the memory is, the historical memory is a basis of self-identification, that, and combined with the high level of prejudice measured by sociological investigations and especially on the internet, all these factors contribute to the perception, which is very widespread among Hungarian Jews, that despite the lack of anti-Semitic violence in the country, and despite the support for Israel, the hostility against the Jews is growing. This is a very important and interesting indicator which came up as one of the main results of our research, that when we asked our subjects, in both cases we asked around 2,000 subjects, this was a questionnaire-based report, so in both cases our subjects declared that their personal experience of anti-Semitism is much lower nowadays than it was 20 years ago in the case of the first survey, but the feeling about the strengths, about the intensity of anti-Semitic hostility is much stronger than it was before. And this is a real discrepancy. So, how to summarize all this? The Jews in Hungary nowadays are obviously much more Jewish than they were decades ago. The studies we carried out demonstrated that instead of passing and hiding, Jews perceive themselves, though not necessarily as members of a religious minority, but much more frequently as members of a bounded ethnic group. These changes can be considered as features of a Jewish ethnic revival. In longer run, intensification of ethnic group consciousness could have an impact on the religious cultural renewal as well. The basic question is that even if ethnic groupness becomes stronger in the future, will it be able to counterbalance the demographic trends, negative demographic trends, the numerical decline in the size of the group due to relative low birth rates, emigration, and intermarriage? Whether this will happen, this is an open question. Thank you.
Thank you for your speech, Professor András Kovács. Now, let me introduce Rabbi Baruch Oberlander to make his speech.
Thank you for inviting me, ladies and gentlemen. I have a debt to pay. Since I wasn't here personally by the first conference, I was only able to give some welcoming words through Zoom, and it wasn't even the best connection, so I'm happy that I could be here personally today. Thank you for organizing this conference. Thank you for researching the subject. If you want to plan a future, you have to learn from the past and from the present. I was asked to talk about some Jewish subject. So not so much anti-Semitic, but Semitic. Really, as a rabbi, I deal more with Semitism than with anti-Semitism. So let me give you a few thoughts about the religious community, the Orthodox community in Budapest, in Hungary, after the Holocaust, up till today. Before the Holocaust, there was a tension in the Orthodox communities between what we call the traditional Ashkenazic Jews and the Hasidic Jews. The tension was that the Ashkenazi Jews claimed, and they gave a feeling as if those that went towards Hasidism, which is a more enthusiastic way of practicing religious Judaism, as if they changed and they somehow left the customs and left and it was tension. My family was involved in a lot of these tensions on the Hasidic, mostly on the Hasidic side. My great uncle, who was the chief rabbi of Chust, Rabbi Moshe Greenwald, he himself came from a very traditional Ashkenazic family, and he became this big Chassid, as you could see in his books and his writings, and he and his students and his family were all one of the factors that pulled Orthodox Judaism in Hungary more towards Hasidism. My ancestors and uncles in Makave, in Moko, and in Paksh were the organizers of the Hasidic community, and so the tension the tension was very big, and as I said, we were part of this. So somehow they tried to give a feeling as if the Hasidic leaning Orthodox Jews are the one that strayed and left the tradition. Now, after the Second World War, after the Holocaust, when the Orthodoxy reorganized, mainly and first of all in Budapest, but also in the countryside, at least till 1956 very strongly, the question comes up that since a big part of the Orthodox Jews left Hungary, so the question was, how was the connection between the Orthodox Jews and the Orthodox community here in Hungary with the diaspora of Orthodox Jews outside of Hungary? Interesting enough, when, for example, the big question came up in the end of 1949, beginning of 1950, when the authorities decided that the Orthodox and the non-Orthodox Nalo communities have to unite. And this was a major, major big question for the Orthodox community, what they could do, what are they allowed to do, what should they do. So who did they turn to? They felt that they themselves are not capable of making this big decision. They have to turn to the big Orthodox authorities outside of Hungary. Interesting enough, they did not turn to the non-Hasidic famous Orthodox rabbis outside of Hungary. For example, probably the most famous of them was Rabbi Akiva Sofer, who was the rabbi of Pressburg, Bratislava, who left Czechoslovakia before the war, and he was in Israel. And he should be considered as the leading Orthodox rabbi outside of Hungary, being a descendant of the famous rabbis of Pressburg. They did not consult him. They consulted the Hasidic rabbis in Israel and the United States. Interesting enough, in the end of 1949, they wrote a letter to Rabbi Teitelbaum, the Satmar Rebbe, asking him what they should do, how they should act about it. Interesting enough, he answered a long letter, a page and a half, which is considered a long answer, which practically he writes, I understand your question, it's a very good question, and has many sides to it, but there's no way I can help you decide on this question. You should make your own decision. I cannot help you with this. But as I mentioned, they felt that they're not capable of making such a decision, so they turned to the Rabbi Aaron Rokeach, the Belzer Rebbe, in Jerusalem and Tel Aviv, and they asked him the question. Now, he himself was not from Hungary, he was from Galicia, but a lot of the Belzer Hasidim, his followers were from Hungary before the war and after the war, and during the war, 1943, beginning of 1944, he escaped here to Hungary. So he was considered part of the Hungarian, he was considered in a way an Hungarian leader. He took the question very seriously. He said he invited one of the Hungarian rabbis in Jerusalem, talked it over with him once and twice, then he dictated a clear answer, and this answer arrived here to the rabbis, and that's exactly what they did. They made a meeting and they wrote down what their conditions, how they will work with this, and it was like practically what the Belzer Rebbe from Israel answered. So interesting enough that after the war, when the Orthodox community was in need of guidance, it was not the non-Hasidic rabbis that they turned to, but the Hasidic rabbis they turned to. And afterwards also, after the 1950 unification, who were the ones from outside of Hungary that helped and worked together with the local Orthodox community. It was the Hasidic Orthodox community in New York mainly, and not the not Hasidic community. Same thing is, if we will, the same question can come up: where do we find Hungarian communities outside of Hungary today in the big diaspora? And the answer is, if we were looking for somehow get the still an original feeling of Hungarian communities outside of Hungary, the place to look for them is in the Hasidic communities in Brooklyn, in London, in Antwerp, in Jerusalem, and not in the not Hasidic communities. For example, if it was the Papa Hasidim, if it's Satmar, if it's Vishnitz, if it's there, you could still find the Hungarian customs, the Hungarian rabbis. Everybody quotes them, everybody knows them, and the excitement of something Hungarian, something Hungarian. And the not Hasidic communities, which there were but over the years, they almost completely disappeared. I remember when I grew up, I was a kid in the 1970s in Brooklyn. There was the Wiener Kehilla, the Wiener community. Wien is Vienna, but it was the local non-Hasidic Hungarian community, and it was a strong community, and they did the customs and everything. And as the years passed, they became smaller and smaller and smaller, till the point that they almost disappeared, to the point that they officially became a Hasidic community. So to try to revive its membership, it wasn't a big success, because when a community already almost vanishes, it's not easy to rebuild it, especially if there's tens of communities all around. But anyways, they felt that the way they could save this authentic Hungarian community is by becoming Hasidic. What happened with the second generation of the non-Hasidic Hungarian communities? Or they became Hasidic, or they became modern Orthodox, which is completely leaving behind this whole the original authentic Hungarian type of Hasidic type of Orthodox life. Or if they still were very strongly Orthodox, they became what we call in Yiddish Litvish. That's Lithuanian. If it's Lakewood, New Jersey, probably the biggest yeshiva in the higher education in the world, or anywhere else. And again, by assimilating into those communities, they lost the authentic Hungarian touch. So by the end of the day, the Hasidic communities that before the war were as if the ones that left the Hungarian tradition, they are the ones that helped save the local Orthodox community here in Hungary, and they're the ones that still, where you could still find the original Hungarian customs, etc., outside of Hungary. Now, I mentioned before the Satmar Rebbe, Rabbi Teitelbaum, or in Yiddish he used to be called Rebbe Yoelish, that when he was asked this big, he was faced with this big dilemma, this big question of how to unite, or how to go about the unification between the Orthodox and the non-Orthodox community, he didn't answer. Interesting enough, if somebody knows the the history, the past and the present of the Satmar community in New York. It's a very, very big community, very successful, and it's all thanks to Rabbi Teitelbaum, the Satmar Rebbe, who was a very, in the United States, he was a very charismatic leader, and he pulled to himself a lot of those Holocaust survivors that were looking for a community, and that's how he became this major big community, this very big leader. But if we look in his history, we see a very strange phenomenon, which is whenever he was wherever he faced a major dilemma, a major question, he did not come up with answers. One thing where he always came up with the answer, if it had to do with Zionism, because he was one of the leading anti-Zionist leaders in Hungary and after the war, again in the United States. So if we were talking about Zionism, he always had the answer how to fight Zionism, etc., etc. But if it was other bigger or smaller questions, he never came up. Like he was always hesitant and not being able to answer. To bring a few points, I'm going to be short because otherwise we're going to have to delve into a lot of different subjects. In 1941, there was a law here in Hungary that stores cannot be closed on Saturday, on the Shabbat. It has to be open. No way of closing it. The major question: how could Jews keep the stores open? A Jew is supposed to rest on Shabbat. He cannot work. And the rabbis came together and tried to deal with the question: what can we allow? What can we not allow? Can we allow that a Jew should have a non-Jewish worker there? The problem is, non-Jewish worker, you still have to be on top of him. So the Jew is going to have to be sitting in the store, and the non-Jewish worker is going to run the store. Is it allowed? Is it not allowed? It was a major question. Interesting enough, if we look in the Responsum book, Shalot Utshuvot of the Satmar Rebbe, Divrei Yoel, he has a long writing, like probably 8-9 printed big size pages on the subject, and at the end he ends up, really, I cannot say yes and I cannot say no. Means after going on and on and on, he comes to the conclusion, really, it's a major question. I cannot say yes and I cannot say no, and I'm not answering this question. He says many rabbis. I was asked from many places and different big leaders of this country, which is Hungary, and I did not want to answer. I have no answer for the question. Meaning, he didn't come up with an answer. Let's continue. In 1947 was after the war, and as mentioned before, a lot of Orthodox Jews wouldn't stay here in Hungary already right after the war, and this continued until 1956. So people turned to him and asked him, mainly in writing, should we come to the United States? And his answer was, I cannot tell you yes and I cannot tell you no. Do whatever you feel like, and God should guide you in the right way. And it was a major question. It was after the Holocaust, and people really needed guidance, and he just didn't answer. He didn't answer the question. And there's a few such letters where people are asking him, and he doesn't answer. He doesn't come up with guidance. And at the same time, the same person was Rabbi Lichtenstein. He was the rabbi in Krasna, which is Transylvania. And at the same time, he wrote him like a letter with two questions. So one question touched on Zionism, and he gave a long, clear answer. The other question was, should I come to the United States? No answer. He wrote to him again. No answer. So he asked him, and then Rabbi Lichtenstein was in Paris, and the question was how he should work together with the local rabbinate, or he should go on his own. Again, or he just didn't answer at all, or he just answered a very vague answer. And in Rabbi Lichtenstein, in one of the letters, he writes, I asked the Satmar Rebbe, and so, I don't know why, weeks passed, I didn't get any answer. And at the same time, he got an answer, a very long answer on Zionism. And this goes on 1947, 1949, 1950. Rabbi Lichtenstein writes about somebody else who is a sheikh, the ritual slaughterer, that asked the Rebbe what to do. Should he come to the United States or not? And the Rebbe told him, I cannot tell you yes, and I cannot tell you no. Do whatever you want. In New York, they came to the Satmar Rebbe. They wanted to organize a rabbinic organization of Hungarian Orthodox rabbis. And again, he was hesitant to decide to make such an organization. They came again and again and again, and he still didn't answer. Finally, they were able to pressure him, and he agreed, and that became the CRC. It's called in Hebrew it's called the Itachdut HaRabbanim, and in English it's the Central Rabbinical Congress. Meaning, so very strangely, that besides one subject that he always felt good, he felt that he could answer, or the other questions he was always hesitant. And really, it's not something so rare in the rabbinic literature. It's called miyirei hora'ah, people that have a fear of making religious or general decisions. And there's such a thing. So interesting. In one thing where he was very active, he made decisions constantly, which was Zionism, and other things he stayed away. That's why also when they asked him here what to do in 1948, he didn't answer that, to go to the Belzer Rebbe. That's where the Orthodox community got guidance. Anyway, this is just, as I mentioned, the Satmar Rebbe, I wanted to bring out this point. Anyways, so as I mentioned before, there are Hungarian communities, authentic Hungarian communities outside of Hungary today, but they are all with the Hasidic flavor. So those people that those communities before the Second World War who felt that this is not authentic enough, they don't have communities where they could feel really at home. But otherwise, they are the ones that continue the Hungarian culture, customs, etc., etc. Thank you very much.